Good afternoon. So glad to be here, and even more so, I'm glad that you are still here because, Duolingo is going to start their show at the same time. So, and yeah, now I see that Duolingo is starting now. Yeah, take your time. So, I'm going to talk to you about life after launch, how to keep your product alive. And I come from a company called Quick from Helsinki, Finland, and I think the funny thing here is that you don't know me, you don't know our company, you don't know our customers, so we're really starting from a blank slate here. The thing is, we have been doing this stuff for about 10 years now. We've seen some success and some failures, and I'm trying to give you something useful from our learnings. So just to kind of give you context, we are there, we build solutions or apps for our customers, they give us some money, and basically then they have their customers and they bring the stuff there in scale and try to get some more money out of that. And the thing is to kind of maximize this profit that is created. And sadly, we have seen it go the other way around as well. And back in the day, we kind of didn't care. We thought it's not our business, we are just building the apps or solutions or whatever for the customers. But we started understanding at some point that actually we want to make sure that they succeed. So, we were young and needed money, so we have been not really building fast apps, but stuff like you can really do kind of scanning for your palm, and it's technically really complex and makes no sense at all. But yeah, we've been there. So it's an interesting flow how to get the product right. We've been talking about this stuff, and there are multiple processes for that. But I think it's even more interesting how to build the right product, like we've been seeing here also a lot. And there are two interesting questions. One is the first one, like how to make sure that we are solving the right problem. The other one is like how do we keep on learning after first launch? How do we keep the users in the focus there? And that will be the topic of today. So basically, we should know MVP by now, and many companies argue that the jury is still out whether you should be using the car metaphor or the donut metaphor for that. But other than that, it seems that we kind of know what this means. But then the question is, what happens after that? You have scoped down your first version of the product, and you've shipped it, and now you're happy with your MVP out of the building. And very often what happens is that instead of chasing that bright light over there, what you do is you close the blinds and kind of start building all the cool stuff that you have on your backlog. So many nice things that didn't make the cut for the first version. Has any of you seen this kind of behavior happening? Yeah, some have. Great. So it leads to this kind of way of working where you have teams that are kind of resourced as hand pairs, and the development is really backlog-driven. There's lacking collaboration between business and design and development. End users are not involved systematically, and products are basically defined in terms of features and not the solutions or the needs that they are solving. And yeah, for these 2 days we have been hearing a discussion about this bright new way of doing things, and that's where we kind of want to also take our clients. And here are some tips about that. So yeah, basically we see that it also gets better results if you do things properly. These are real cases that we've been building. I like to use Lean Startup as a kind of framework for building new stuff, even if you are not a startup or building like using that kind of scalable business model. But it's still a useful way of thinking like where you are in terms of the life cycle of your product. So if you subscribe into this jargon, so you have the problem-solution fit, and then you have the product-market fit. And typically, the kind of fallacy is that people assume that when they have the MVP out of the door, so suddenly they are already at the product-market fit, even though at this point you actually should be iterating and learning from the market and getting your product to better match the real needs of your customers. The other fallacy seems to be that companies believe that if I only build more features and I complete my whole backlog, then I will reach scale. And obviously that's not the truth. You need to be doing something else than that. So that's kind of setting the scene. And now I'm going to talk about two ways of solving these needs. One is maintaining the roadmap. So the question seems to be often that you want to maintain long-term vision, at the same time you don't want to specify too much upfront, because often it happens that those designs end up rotting in some kind of drawer. You never end up delivering them in reality, and then it's a wasted effort. So you want to minimize doing specs, but still having enough. And funnily enough, many people have been touching the same kind of ideas already, like was during the last talk. So basically, I think having some kind of customer journey is a good way of documenting the overall flow. And on that journey, you can then have these kind of concept ideas or service components. Some people even call them feature cards. I don't like that term because it's not about features, but rather it's about solving a need. So where you lightly document something that you have discovered from the market when you've done your research, like what kind of business value there is, what kind of user value, what kind of implementation cost is entailed, and what kind of metrics you are tracking. And this way you can cheaply write it down on this level and then just forget about it and move on. Another things that you're going to need to help you maintain your vision, and now this is where we kind of take this pre-existing stuff off the oven, like a TV chef, because now we have skipped the MVP phase and building the first version. So we have some kind of vision document in place already by this time. We have our KPIs, we have our user personas, we kind of know what we are doing. The other thing we should have is some kind of design system containing the style guide for building stuff, and in the optimal case we are having these like reusable components, like people have been talking here during the event. And with this kind of tool set in place, we can then effectively manage our roadmap. So when a need arises, when we know that we have to build something, we take the kind of vision document and we take the service component and we take the design system and we turn that into a UI spec. And we specify it to a level where it's enough so that we can start developing, but we don't overdo it in a way that we still get developer input during the development of that specific user interface. So basically, going from old school waterfall, where you start with business, do design, and then development, skipping the old school agile, where you only do once the business stuff, and then it's just building, to have this kind of real running lean kind of way of working. And yeah, there are many details. We could talk about this, but I'm going to skip this and give you 4 takeaways of this stuff. One is this postcard from Norway. I was there last summer, and I think this is a nice metaphor from Jeff Patton from the book User Story Mapping, where he says that a good specification is like a vacation photo. It means nothing for the observer because they were not there, but rather it's a good way of having a discussion. You can explain how it works, and that's the way of actually communicating specifications. You can never write a spec that would communicate everything. If you have a lean spec, people will complain it's not detailed enough. If you try a detailed specification, they will say, too much text didn't read. People are never happy, so don't even try, but rather have something that can work as the platform for discussion. Other things for definition of ready is that each story should have a real KPI and a plan how to measure that. And one good way also to do is to always prototype your stories before you ever get developing anything, and actually test them with real people even before committing to develop anything. And yeah, handing over specs in a smart way, telling stories rather than trying to document something in a document. And then understand that you shouldn't finalize everything before starting development, but rather have enough leeway there so you can iterate with developers and find the perfect solution together. Designers likely never know everything that is to be taken into account there. I'm going to tell a quick story about maintaining your backlog and how to do this in practice. We were once upon a time designing this user interface for this kind of trip booking service. The background was that they had a desktop version, and we had to make a mobile version of that. And we were trying out to just take the same idea that was working on desktop to mobile directly, and then we saw that it wasn't working too well. You couldn't see the prices and availability quickly enough, and it was too hard to change between product types. So we tried another version where we went then adding more stuff there to communicate the difference of the types and show the prices immediately. But it became pretty cluttered, and it was hard to understand still what these different types of products meant. So we created a separate screen or a menu where you would select your kind of product what you are choosing, but people didn't see the menu and they didn't still understand the products, and they started to see that actually the problem is in the product itself and not so much in the user interface. So we understood that, okay, what if we do it so that we are not going to make you choose between your products, but we rather ask you questions that you know the answer to, like when are you coming back? If you say no return, it's one-way trip. If you say same day, it's this day trip we were trying to solve. Or if you say any day, then it's like a normal round trip. It was working better, but it was like an unnatural way of people to think like how I'm going to book a trip, like when am I coming back? So we iterated it to be so that you actually just select your dates, and then based on that, the user interface will adjust. And it was working really well. Kind of solved our need. Okay, it made the one-way trip a bit harder to find, but we were happy with the iterated solution and the kind of UI design breakthrough that we had done there. But the funny thing is that we then decided that we actually don't need it yet because there were more important things to do. Actually, 2 years went past and we never built that functionality. And then last spring, it was actually, again, at the top of our backlog. And we were discussing, like, should we build this now? And I was asking the PO, like, why are we doing it now if we didn't do it like 2 years ago? Why is it suddenly important enough to be built? And he took a look at the desktop data and the mobile data and actually saw that mobile was already selling this kind of trip type more than desktop, and decided that, okay, we don't have to build it. So the kind of nice thing was to iterate a really well-working UI, but even more important was to understand we don't need to build it. Okay, we could have killed that earlier, but it was still very important to be able to make that decision. Okay, let's not build something even we have invested time in designing the user interface. So that's something worth keeping in mind. And as a designer, you have to be kind of happy to be able to kill your stuff, even though it feels bad, but still, it's an accomplishment and you should congratulate yourself when doing that. Okay, something about focusing on right metrics. So if we have this journey kind of way of documenting our product, it's useful to maintain the long-term vision. But sometimes it's still even more useful to kind of see the life cycle, how people are using your product and what kind of commercial metrics are related to that. I like to use this customer factory metaphor that is adapted from the book Scaling Lean, and it's based on this pirate metrics model. Basically, you see your product as a factory that creates happy customers. You have the acquisition step when you think how you turn people, take people to your system, how you activate them and make them happy, how you keep them coming back, how you incentivize them to tell their friends, and then how you actually take money out of them, how you get sales. It's very simple, but it's a useful thinking tool to map your product around. So you might be thinking, like, how do you actually lower the threshold of trying out your product and how you really minimize all the steps required for that. If you're doing apps, you might think of things like deferred deep linking. So if you come from the web, you go to the App Store and then you install the solution so you are automatically logged in. That's one way of lowering the threshold here. Or you have to even think in terms like, I need to have good enough ratings for my app so that people will download it. If your rating is below 4 stars, nobody will care. So it's not just the UI, it's about the whole product experience, how well it works, and how it operates in the market. And it's a good idea to follow these metrics and see how you're doing against benchmarks. The other step, activating people. So oftentimes you have different kind of onboarding flows, but it's very important to think in terms like, what is the most important thing I want the people to do when they first opened my service. So, for example, Tinder is known for the fact that they really want you to get your first match as quickly as possible. How can they deliver that unique value to you so that you want to start using the service? So you shouldn't really waste your onboardings for user interface instructions, but rather think in terms like what I want the user to accomplish and what is useful for me as a company. It's also a matter of how you ask for your permission for push messages. If you do it like smartly, you can get like a lot better retention. Of course, a huge deal. There are different techniques like push messages and all that, but it's also about building the kind of hook model and giving people logical reasons to come back. It's something that you really need to build inside the product and not just add as a marketing tool. For example, here we saw when we added a loyalty card inside this travel application, the uninstall rates were reduced significantly. So giving people reasons to not uninstall your application if you are in the app business. Revenue, it's about making payments easy, of course. Adian was talking earlier here how to do it smartly. But it's also about finding some derivative currencies. It's not only about making sales. For example, these guys were able to notice that people who were using their app during a trip actually rated the whole trip experience so much better having used the app there. So you can also quantify a customer experience and see the value for that. When it comes to referring, it's not just about adding a share button there, but actually thinking what is the reason for the customer to share, how it will make them look like, how to touch their feelings, their emotions to really get them to share your stuff. One useful way I've found how to approach this thing is to kind of have these steps on the wall when organizing a workshop, and then mapping what kind of features you have and putting them in these different phases, and then seeing like what kind of hypothesis I have connected with those features. Often you find out that many of the features just exist there and you don't even know why you have them there. But it's a good idea to actually see like what I think, why do I have this functionality? And then even better if you have metrics connected to those hypotheses. And often you see that, okay, I don't have metrics for everything. So it's a good way to just do this kind of analysis what you are doing. And testing it systematically. So this kind of test card is a useful way of getting started. Documented what you believe will happen and how to verify that, what you need to build to test out your assumption. We've been often using this kind of separate board for these experiments. So for example, in Trello, you can have these different columns for like building phase and testing or measuring phase and learning phase and seeing what's going on. And in these Trello tickets, you can have these test cards inside them. Just a handy little way of doing this in practice. One free tip is that your authentication often sucks. It's something that I think is often like skipped thing. People don't really pay enough attention to this. And it's very relevant both for your first user experience and your returning users. So you can reduce friction during onboarding, and you can reduce friction during recurring usage. Still, however, very often authentication is kind of considered like a solved problem, and you address that with minimum effort and don't care enough. So putting that to work is a good idea for almost any service. We just recently helped one of our clients to improve their login experience. Earlier on, password forgotten was one of the most visited pages on the whole site. And then this kind of SSO solution was built to make it easier to log in, and we can see a dramatic result there. If you cannot see, I can zoom in a bit, so yeah. Okay, so that was focusing on right metrics. Still some takeaways. So for designers, I think one implication is that you have to learn to embrace the killed features. You have to be happy when you have been able to remove something from the backlog and never build something, even though you really gave your heart to designing it. Another thing is that if you want to build something fancy, you will have to sell it. There needs to be a metric that it is improving, and you need to be able to justify why you need to do it. And also you need to accept that sometimes fancy is not the correct answer. Sometimes you have to do quick and dirty to experiment, and you should be proud of that as well as a designer. And yeah, before designing anything, you should demand to know why we are doing this and how do we know we were successful. For POs, I would say that it's often so that you know your business needs, but you won't tell them to your team. And yeah, teams are typically full of smart people, so it's a good idea to actually let them know. Sometimes it also happens that there are POs who don't even know why they're building something, and that is a hard situation. Then you really should focus on getting your facts correct first. And yeah, this has been said today already many times, but when presenting requirements, don't communicate solutions, but rather use needs. Tell what we need to solve, because your team is full of solution experts who can come up with cool ideas. And yeah, don't be afraid of sunk costs. Sometimes you have to scrap what you already did, and it's good for you, good for everybody. For developers, I would like to say that do not communicate your expertise by saying why something is hard. Also, do not try to kind of communicate that I'm smart by telling that this spec is not solving everything, but rather tell how you would improve it and be kind of helpful. Don't see this as a war of some sort. It sometimes still happens. Yeah, like I said, if you have a better solution than what the designer was able to come up with, so share it and let people know why it's better. Great design is a shared responsibility and everybody's mission in the end. The last point for developers would be also that you might have to try a bit harder to kind of demonstrate your worth as an analytical problem solver, because there are still people who see developers as smart pairs of hands that create code, but developers can do so much more. So you have to push harder. It's unfair, but it's a reality. Okay, so to sum up, customer journey, service components, a great way of managing your roadmap and your vision. And don't be afraid of sunk cost. You don't have to build everything that you have designed. Treat every launch as an experiment. Try to prove yourself wrong. And growth is a shared responsibility, so everybody should know the goals. Everybody should contribute. Thank you, everybody.